You know it's going to be a good one when before anyone even knows a merge request has been made, it has been preemptively locked to project members only. We've got a bit of a fun one here. So on Linux, basically ever since we've had a GUI, if you do a middle mouse click, you can do a paste. And yeah, if you didn't know that was a thing, yeah, you can actually do that. Whatever is contained within your clipboard, with a big caveat, and we'll get to the caveat in just a bit, gets pasted when you do a middle mouse paste. Try it out right now, and you're very likely going to see it. In fact, I can actually show you. Let's go and take this here, and middle mouse, there we go. Let's go down some lines, back to the start of the line, take this here, and there you go. Now, I say likely because on X11, for some reason, lost to the sands of time, no one will ever know why it was like this, middle mouse pasting was deeply ingrained into the server. I don't know why. Nobody knows why. If somebody can work out why, I'd love to know. So deeply ingrained, in fact, that there was no reasonable way to disable it, and people that wanted to get rid of the functionality basically just remapped the middle mouse click to something else. Now, with the move over to Wayland, everyone kind of realized how horrible of a design decision that was and didn't do that because that was stupid and never made any sense. However, they did keep middle mouse pasting around, just implemented in a way where if you wanted to disable it, that was possible. And recently, a merge request was opened on Gnome by Jordan Petridis, disable primary paste by default. This is an X11ism, originally an X setting which frequently results in unexpected behavior with people pressing the middle mouse button. It's commonly used for other actions, or more often, getting clicked by accident, and dumping your entire clipboard or having no indication that this will happen is nothing short of a dumpster fire. People that know about the setting and really love this functionality can easily override the setting, as is the Gnome way, by doing so from the command line. Anything outside of the Gnome vision that doesn't fit in with the things that Gnome wants you to know about shouldn't be exposed in an easy way. Now, maybe it will be. Maybe. Possibly. But a lot of things get relegated to G settings, which should just be in their graphical settings menu. And also, in the Gnome way, I'm pretty sure this is in Gnome Tweaks. Again, Gnome Tweaks is a required application for Gnome and should be a core part of Gnome. I've said this before and I'm going to keep saying it. Or better yet, Gnome Tweaks should be merged into the Gnome settings menu, and then if you don't want to expose all of that stuff by default, have it behind an advanced option. That just makes sense. But that won't happen. But hold on for a second. It's called primary paste. This is where things get into the weird Linux has 40-year-old design decisions that predate Linux ingrained into it because this is the way that things have basically always been done on Unix. So on X11, you don't have one clipboard. The ones we typically concern ourselves with are primary and clipboard. There is also technically a secondary as well, but typically apps nowadays don't really interact with secondary. It can still be accessed by using things like Xclip though, and basically exists as like an extra clipboard that you can just store things in. It shouldn't be relied on, things can be deleted, but it does exist. Clipboard is the one you commonly think of when you think of doing a copy and paste. It is your normal clipboard. So if I go and highlight this text here and do a Control-C, go over here, do Control-V, that text is, I don't know why this website formats things like this, but that text is the text that we would expect to see from doing that. However, let's go and instead highlight this bit of text here, don't press Control-C, and now do a middle mouse click. Something else is pasted. However, if I do Control-V again, it's the same text we saw before. So clipboard is the text you explicitly go and copy. Primary is the last text you highlighted. And the middle mouse paste doesn't pull from the clipboard, it pulls from the primary. So if you want to do a paste without doing a copy, just doing a highlight by itself, that's what the middle click paste does. And this is why some people find it kind of confusing, because it's not the thing that you explicitly copied. People that know this feature exists, people that are used to this feature and like having this around, really like this as an option. But if you come from a system where this isn't a thing, this can seem kinda confusing, kinda broken. Why am I pasting different things? Right now I'm on Neria, right now I'm on Wayland. This has the same behavior that X11 does. Not exactly though. So traditionally on Wayland, there was only the one clipboard, the clipboard you would typically interact with when you go and copy some text or copy an image, whatever it is you want to copy. We'll stay with text just to keep things simple. On Wayland, there isn't actually a secondary. Interestingly though, the first ones that proposed the idea of having a primary selection on Wayland, whilst you might think it's W or root, especially since the issue is from Sway, it was actually from Gnome themselves. Now, this links to a file which has since been deleted, or they've restructured their GitLab so it's not a thing anymore, but Gnome with GTK were the first ones to actually replicate the primary selection on Wayland. But later down the line, it was replaced with a more general protocol, and this is what basically everybody implements. However, it is very funny to see the project that originally brought this behavior over to the Wayland side now basically saying this is an X11ism and we shouldn't go and do so. If you ever thought that, like, a project would always pass down its knowledge, that doesn't necessarily happen. Along with this Gnome discussion, there was also one open on the Firefox side. Disable middle mouse paste on XP Unix by default. Also again opened by Jordan Petridis, he goes by Alitera on various platforms on the internet. This is a little known feature and behavior that leads into user confusion when they click the middle mouse button without knowing about its functionality. Most of the time, it's also clicked by accident, and it's very weird to have the clipboard dumped on such occasions. The feature is also not discoverable at all, and even on the free desktop wiki page, the entirety of the primary selection is referred to as an Easter egg. Now, this is a slightly dishonest framing from Free Desktop themselves. Firstly, this page hasn't been updated since 2013, which is about 3 years prior to Gnome bringing this feature over to the Wayland side, so keep that in mind. Secondly, the reason why it's not a discoverable feature is because the desktop doesn't make it a discoverable feature. It's not discoverable because you don't present it to the user. You're part of the GUI that presents functionality. You are the one responsible for not making it discoverable. Now let's start with the Gnome discussion, because the tone between Gnome and Firefox is very, very different about this functionality. Let's go here. Another option is to enable/disable the feature on a compositor level, possibly with an option in the system settings. On Wayland, the middle click uses a dedicated protocol. Again, a protocol that originally started from Gnome, which I'm going to stop talking about that, which compositors could trivially turn off that would ensure consistency within DEs. The discussion is for changing a default value. Any change, like introducing a new setting, can and should happen separately. The compositor would still need to use a setting anyway, and that setting would need to be controlled by an application, Gnome Control Center, Gnome Tweaks, whatever, so we still need a gsettings key that can get proxied across sandbox boundaries by XDG Desktop Portal Gnome. If we want to elevate GTK-enabled primary paste to a generic desktop setting, then we will need to discuss this on the XDG Desktop Portal discussion forum to include the key in the settings portal. In any case, GTK will want to watch a key in order to disable a fallback clipboard that is used when the Wayland compositor does not provide the primary selection protocol, as well as do so under X11 while we still support it. The GTK-enabled primary paste gsettings key is mirrored to GTK settings, GTK-enabled primary paste GTK settings property, and as long as that property exists, we need to match it to something. And from Carlos, I'll delegate on designers thinking this is a better default. A possible downside is the UI to turn it off or on after this lives only in tweaks. And from Adrian Vovd, this is... I like Adrian, but this is a real weird comment. My 2 cents as input for the design team as someone who's not a designer. If we assume the Linux desktop has 4% market share and assume the highly improbable fact that all of those 4% know how to use middle-click paste and prefer it over the alternative auto-scrolling, there's still 96% of users that are used to environments where auto-scrolling is available and middle-click paste doesn't exist. So we should default middle-click paste to off. This is such a weird comment because effectively this argument can be made about doing everything to make GNOME like Windows. Why is there an argument about being able to position windows? 96% of users are used to having this. Why is there not a system tray? 96% of users are used to this. This is such a strange argument to be making about anything not just involving GNOME, just involving Linux. The argument is basically saying, why don't we make a clone of Windows because that's what most people are used to? However, it should be a setting since it has been a feature that I'm certain many of our users have ingrained into the workflows. I can pretty much guarantee that Red Hat will get support requests about this if we turn the setting off without an easy way to turn it back on. Oh, I'm absolutely certain that people that are in an enterprise space are not going to be happy about a random thing changing that they didn't understand was going to change. Having a UI for this setting also gives us a convenient place to explain how the feature works so the user can learn about it naturally. I absolutely agree. If you're going to make any change to a setting like this, there's no point making that change without also having the discussion about how do we make it easy to re-enable. Now, do I think that's going to happen in the case of GNOME? Not necessarily, but I will be happy to be proved wrong. Now, as a totally reasonable thing with this idea of presenting it to the user in some way, somebody went and made a separate issue about exactly that. And this got closed very quickly for what I think is a really dumb reason. Add a pop-up for the first use of primary paste. There's a known problem of primary clipboard, aka primary paste, aka middle click paste, being an Easter egg. This situation resulting in hot flame wars when Wayland was conceived, where some users considered it an obsolete feature, whereas others claiming it's an amazing workflow simplification. Again, do I mention GNOME? Suggestion. Upon doing anything that triggers primary paste protocol for the very first time in the system, a user will be presented with a pop-up explaining the feature and asking if they want to turn it on or off. This is a totally reasonable issue to open. You would think. This is an issue tracker, and trying to circumvent the only mechanism at our disposal, locking down an issue to people actually developing things by opening another issue elsewhere and referencing comments and contributors is a great way to get your account banned. Stop doing this. If you want to have a discussion, use Discourse instead of wasting everybody's time. The reason why he tagged people that were involved in the other issue is because they're on the design team, and this is a discussion about a proposal, and they literally have a tag. They literally have a tag for enhancements, and for no other issue ever has it been a requirement to have a discussion on Discourse first. The reason why this is an issue is because this one got locked, because this is a change that GNOME people want to make and want to have no feedback about it whatsoever unless you're a GNOME developer. That is the only reason there was any issue taken here. So obviously, this is going to go nowhere, as should be expected from a discussion like this. But a duplicate was also made over in KDE land as well, and there has been some mixed comments about it, but there has at least been discourse about whether or not having this is a good idea. There's a couple of concerns. One is we don't really know how to introduce this, because a pop-up, yes, you could do, but it might feel kind of annoying, might bother users, and doesn't really feel like a great way to do things. It kind of feels like you're just getting in the way of a user just for the sake of it. However, doing something to raise the feature seems like a good idea, whether it be in the welcome screen, whether it be some other system. Having something that shows that this is a thing you can do on Linux seems like a good idea. One point raised by Oliver Beard is, instead of just going and changing a setting and then waiting and seeing what backlash is going to happen. Leave that to the downstreams. This is effectively what they did with the single click versus double click to open. They realized that even though upstream single click to open was the default, basically every distro was switching over to double click because that's what users preferred. People thought that double clicking a file just made more sense because that's how it worked on other systems they used. So instead of making a change upstream, let the downstreams play around with it, because Fedora KDE is possibly considering playing around with the setting, and if people like it, and if more distros do it, then copy the distros. If users don't like it, then don't make the change, because you're just wasting time then. But no matter what is done, there needs to be something exposed in the settings menu that lets the user go and easily enable or disable this with whichever setting they happen to want to be using. And this is a very civil back and forth with people who are not necessarily active contributors to the project. I commented here, a bunch of other people commented here, and this is how you can actually discuss a feature without, like, things immediately turning into a flame war. Listening to what other people are saying, sort of addressing their points, not trying to start an argument with them, but just letting their issues be raised. And now let's go over to Firefox, because Firefox also has a different opinion from what Gnome wants to do. My personal opinion would be to reject it though, because as far as I know, quite a few users use it. Breaking that just to not confuse some users who don't use it isn't worth the disruption. It's enabled in platform toolkits like GTK4. If the feature should be deprecated, the first place for such a change would be the platform toolkits. And he really tried hard to get them on board. Design-wise, it's quite bad to keep for a handful of reasons. It conflicts with the functionality of the middle click button on Firefox, for example, opening windows. Like, that seems to work just fine. Or middle click scrolling seems to work just fine as well. So people have brought this up. I don't really get it. It's entirely he meant to say discoverable and an Easter egg feature. Again, it's not either of those things. Just because Free Desktop calls it an Easter egg that's been a feature that people rely on for 40 years doesn't mean it's an Easter egg, and it's undiscoverable because you're in a desktop that makes it undiscoverable. 3, I think, is somewhat reasonable. People don't know about it, and with it being on by default, end up accidentally pasting passwords and other sensitive information that might be in the clipboard to text fields like chat rooms or Google search. Fair enough. That actually is a reasonable concern. These ones are nonsense. But this one, I think, is reasonable. But one thing I have to ask is, how are you holding your mouse that you accidentally middle click? I've heard this as a complaint from a bunch of people. I don't have my finger sitting over middle mouse all the time. I don't know how people do that. I think implementing the GTK setting should be straightforward. That seems like the less controversial approach to me. Is it exposed in GTK settings? So basically, rather than making a change in Firefox itself, just listen to the setting that you have enabled on your system and then do that in Firefox as well. That is probably the best option. I wonder why suddenly middle mouse is bad. Instead of teaching people how to use it properly, showing some hints or similar, disable it. Please reconsider, it's one of the killer features of Firefox right now. Middle click paste is pretty much everywhere in typical Linux/Unix GUIs. Causing Firefox to behave differently from other software would confuse users. It would be reasonable to follow the GTK setting. Seconded, middle click paste has been in place since the earliest X11 implementations and is indeed a killer feature for many Linux users. Linux users saddled with a MacBook for work are often complaining that copy with drag and paste with middle click is a missing feature of the Mac's otherwise pretty good UI. I fail to see what's confusing or obscure about it. It's pretty well known since the 80s. You are welcome to add an option to disable it, but please leave it on by default. It's a huge time saver in form-oriented or editor-heavy workflows, and many users will be seriously miffed if it was disabled. What's most likely going to happen is just respect the system-wide setting and do whatever the user has configured on their system, which again is the most reasonable approach they could take. Now, I know nobody's going to listen to me because nobody ever does, but Jordan and everybody else involved in Gnome, I guarantee that you will cut back on at least 50% of the threads from people like Lunduke by not intentionally antagonizing him, unless that is your intention. Hey, maybe that is your goal, maybe you like it, but there's no need to be snarky about a feature, calling it an X11ism, saying goodbye you know what you're doing here, right? And again, Gnome is responsible for bringing this feature over to Wayland. Like, you can just disable something and not have to be weird about it. It's okay to do that. Better yet, you can even allow discourse and explain why a change is being made. No, that can't be done. Anyway, this is such a very minor setting, but it became a thing that, like, everybody is talking about. As I said earlier, it can be re-enabled. Why it's not just part of the GNOME settings from the start, I don't know. KDE is probably not going to change anything. Firefox is not going to change anything. Middle mouse pasting is not going away. It might go away on GNOME eventually. We'll see how that goes. But middle click scrolling is not becoming a thing that's like standard across every application. That's just not going to happen. Maybe sometime in the future. But you need a massive effort to make that happen. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Do you middle click paste? I'd love to know. I did a poll on my channel. It, for some reason, got 10,000 votes. Quite a few people do. Quite a few people just do it every so often, and a lot of people never, or just accidentally. A lot of people didn't know the feature existed. But this is still a sizable number of people that make use of the feature. So I'd love to know why. What do you like about it? Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribes daily bearer pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I'm going to delete you.
Something like this.